I never imagined that storing grain on my own property would ignite a war with my homeowners association. But when Deborah Martinez, the HOA board president, slapped me with a $5,000 fine, I knew I had no choice but to make a stand. My name is Vincent Edwards, and I own 42 acres of farmland just outside Topeka, Kansas. The land's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather worked it, my father worked it, and now it's my turn. My father refused to sell when developers came sniffing around in 2019, and when he passed 2 years ago, I inherited not just the land, but the stubborn resolve to keep it productive, to keep in the family. Now, the neighborhood that sprung up around my property, Meadowbrook Estates, was a typical suburban development. Cookie-cutter houses with identical lawns, all painted in the same beige or gray shades. The HOA was formed right away, making rules about everything. Fence colors, mailbox styles, you name it. But I didn't pay much attention because my property was grandfathered in. My farm was established long before their rules even existed. Last spring, I decided to expand my grain storage. The old wooden silo my grandfather built in 1967 was falling apart, and I needed something more reliable. So, I contracted with Morrison Agricultural Solutions to install 3 modern steel grain bins. Each one could hold 20,000 bushels. Practical, functional, and necessary for my business. I had the bins installed on the eastern side of my property, about 300 yards away from the nearest home in Meadowbrook. They were clean, professional, and gleaming in the sunlight, symbols of hard work and productivity. What could be more American than that? Well, apparently, it was an eyesore to the HOA. One Tuesday morning, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee and watching the sunrise paint the fields golden, a silver SUV rolled up my gravel driveway, kicking up dust. Out stepped Deborah Martinez, dressed in what I can only describe as her battle armor, an expensive pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, looking like she was ready for war. "Mr. Edwards," she said, "no pleasantries. I'm Deborah Martinez, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board." "Morning," I replied, not getting up from my rocking chair. "What can I do for you?" "Those structures you've erected are in violation of our community standards," she said, gesturing toward my grain bins as if they were toxic waste containers. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Those grain bins are my property. My property isn't part of your HOA. The aesthetic impact affects our entire community. Our property values are being negatively impacted by your industrial eyesores," she snapped. I leaned back in my chair. "Madam, with all due respect, this is a working farm. Has been since 1952. Your development is the new arrival here, not me." Her jaw tightened. "You'll be hearing from our attorney." "Good day, Mr. Edwards." I watched her SUV disappear down the road, kicking up dust. I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Henderson & Associates, the law firm representing the HOA. Inside was a notice of violation and a $5,000 fine for unauthorized structures creating visual blight. The letter claimed that, although my property wasn't technically in the HOA's jurisdiction, a covenant from 1987 gave them authority over any structures visible from their properties. I called my attorney, Robert Jameson, who had handled my father's estate. He read the letter, researched the supposed covenant, and called me back 3 hours later. "Vincent, this is garbage," Robert said. "That covenant from 1987 was about a shared water agreement between different parties. It has nothing to do with aesthetics or structures. They're trying to bully you." "Then what do we do?" I asked. "We'll draft a response. But be ready, Vincent. HOAs like this don't back down easily, even when they're wrong." Robert sent a detailed legal response explaining why the fine was invalid and baseless. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Deborah showed up again, this time with 2 other board members, Susan Pritchard and Karen Wolf. Yes, Karen, it was almost too perfect. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon when I was repairing a fence. "Mr. Edwards," Deborah said, leaning out of her SUV, "we need to discuss this situation like reasonable adults." I set my post-hole digger down and walked over. I thought my attorney made everything clear. Karen leaned forward from the passenger seat. You can lawyer up all you want, but you're destroying our investment. Our homes are worth less because of your little farm operation. Little farm operation? I felt my blood start to boil. This land produces enough grain to feed thousands of people. What do your McMansions produce besides complaints? Susan, sitting in the back, tried a softer approach. Mr. Edwards, maybe you could paint the bins or plant some trees to screen them. They're galvanized steel. They don't need paint. And I'm not planting trees that will take 10 years to grow just because you don't like looking at agricultural equipment. Deborah's expression hardened. The fine stands. If you don't pay within 30 days, we'll pursue further legal action. Pursue whatever you want, I said. You have no authority here. They left. But that night, something gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep. My mind churned through the situation, and around 2 a.m., I pulled out the property documents and easement records my father had kept meticulously organized. That's when I found it. A 1963 easement agreement allowing Kansas Gas Service to run a natural gas pipeline across the southwestern corner of my property. The pipeline served several purposes when installed, but now it supplied gas to Meadowbrook Estates. The easement was granted in perpetuity, but it included clauses about the property owner's right to terminate it if the easement was no longer mutually beneficial. This caught my attention. The idea formed slowly. If the HOA wanted to play hardball over some grain bins, maybe they needed to understand what real inconvenience looked like. I called Robert again. I need you to look into something for me. A week later, when the 30-day deadline passed, I received another letter. This time, they were suing me for the $5,000 fine, plus an additional $10,000 to plant screening vegetation along their property lines. The absurdity was breathtaking, but I wasn't backing down. I pulled out the easement termination agreement and began documenting the pipeline's impact on my ability to develop my land. I hired an agricultural consultant to develop plans for an irrigation system that would genuinely improve my operations, but could not be safely installed with the current pipeline location. I filed for termination of the easement. The response was immediate and explosive. Kansas Gas Service called within 48 hours asking for a meeting. Their representatives arrived and sat at my kitchen table. Mr. Edwards, we received your termination notice. We'd like to understand your concerns, said Michael Torres, the regional operations manager. My concerns are simple, I said. The pipeline is in the way of my plans. I'm exercising my legal right to terminate an easement that no longer serves my interests. They weren't happy with my answer, but I stuck to my guns. As the deadline for termination approached, Deborah called me in a panic. Mr. Edwards, you're going to cut off gas service to 300 families. I calmly replied, I'm exercising my legal property rights. Your HOA started this fight. You can drop the lawsuit, and this will end today. The court ruled in my favor, but things didn't end there. Deborah and her cronies weren't done. They continued to harass me and the community. But the turning point came when Gregory Walsh, the original developer of Meadowbrook Estates, reached out to me. He offered to fund my irrigation system if I withdrew the easement termination and dropped the lawsuit. I seriously considered it, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I wanted Deborah and her team to learn a lesson. So I declined the offer. In the end, the HOA backed down. The lawsuit was dropped, and I withdrew the easement termination. But not before Deborah's actions had made a fool of her. A few months later, she was arrested for arson after she set fire to one of my grain bins. The evidence was undeniable. She was convicted, and her reign of terror ended. The HOA learned their lesson, and I walked away victorious. But sometimes it's not just about winning. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it gets uncomfortable. Would I have cut off gas to 300 families? Maybe not. But I had to make my point, and it worked. So here's my question. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you stand your ground, or would you cave to the pressure? Let me know in the comments.